everyone, and welcome back to Climate EDU. I am your host, Kayla Anderson, and today I am joined by Dr. Connor Walsh of Greenwich University. Dr. Walsh is an interdisciplinary environmental scientist based in the Natural Resource Institute at University of Greenwich, where he leads an environmental MSc and BSc program. He describes himself as a resource accountant and worked with everyone from sports scientists to naval architects. Today, we will be discussing the BSc at the University of Greenwich, which is the only undergraduate climate change program in the southeast of the UK. It's hosted by the Natural Resource Institute and is based on the experience of its teaching staff working with climate vulnerable groups across the globe. Dr. Walsh, thank you so much for joining me here on Simpatico today. Welcome in.
It's a joy to be here.
Yeah, and I love. Ouch.
Camden Market. About ooh, should I lie and say I just bought it last week? No, it's about 20 years old. The Mott's haven't gotten to it just yet.
Just yet. It still looks stylish, though.
That's what they tell me.
So, with this BSc program, it being the first in the University of Greenwich, the climate change offered in Southeast UK, what was the inspiration behind forming this degree?
Well, a few things. First and foremost, many of my colleagues within the Natural Resources Institute, based in the University of Greenwich in Kent, felt that an awful lot of the work and teaching and research that is already undertaken in our department is so embedded within the emerging climate problem, particularly in relation to experience of working with, as you said, uh, communities around the developing and developed world that are climate vulnerable, that we felt that actually, our perspective is quite unique, mixing this kind of developed and developing world skill based and information based. And we thought, well, we think we can offer something quite unique and impactful and timely given the scale of the climate problem. We already offer a environmental science degree, so some of the material is already well established and works quite well. And we thought that, well, actually, we have the capacity to offer a dedicated climate program, and the university itself has more generally made very significant pledges towards the carbonization and joining the universal process towards reaching net zero as well. So we thought that now is a perfect time to try to align what we're doing within research and the wider efforts of the higher education community to offer something that we think is credible, interesting, and unfortunately really important.
That's extremely exciting, and I'm also relieved to hear that the University of Greenwich is on bringing like sustainable energy and infrastructure and starting to pursue um, like achieving net zero, moving along that path. That is reassuring, and it's wonderful to hear universities are really getting in on this. And to get into kind of a discussion about this program and what you're learning, I would like to ask what kind of perspectives will students develop going into this program and out of it?
Okay, so to dovetail a little bit from your previous questions, so some of the, I say, the rationale for offering this course is, or program rather, is that there is quite a lot written, a growing amount of visibility of climate change in the media, which is great, but equally a lot, some of the scientific content is often used indiscriminately, or perhaps without maybe a, sufficient clarity as we might like. So very often we see concepts like zero and net zero slightly confused, or net negative, and the what we mean by 2 degrees, or 1.5 degrees futures. All these are very important and relative, and sometimes it's difficult to express what they mean within the confines of a story. So we think that climate literacy is really important, particularly as students will be, um, well, all of us will be faced with making some form of direct climate choice in relation to approving or disapproving of different policies presented to us by different parties, regardless of where you are. Most countries will have made statements, or pledges as part of the global, Paris Agreement. So different parties will have different interpretations of what needs to be done. So just as as voters, we across the world will be increasingly asked to make a climate decision in terms of what parties we may or may not support. And equally, and I think this is really important, the students that will be leaving school now and deciding about what modules or courses they want to take further to progress their career. Um, these students will be leaving then higher education and entering the workforce, 3, 4, however many years down the line, a point at which it's likely that measures to mitigate emissions will need to be accelerated. So the individuals are leaving school now in 4 or 5 years' time as they enter the workforce following higher education will be playing a very vital role in trying to contribute to this wider global challenge. So we think it's now is really timely to offer courses that are very um, that are unashamedly and very very clearly focused around trying to better understand and equip ourselves to trying to define, understand, and deal with this problem. And this comes in a number of different ways. I would say that the perspective the students will develop will be the the value of having an interdisciplinary skill set that looks at the sometimes complex and sometimes slightly contradictory priorities of social, environmental, and economic spheres of development, an awareness of the scale and urgency of the problem. We're seeing just this week how some of the projections on sea level rise might be even more dramatic than we had originally foreseen. We want to have we want students to develop both practical skills in terms of trying to measure the scale of the problem, the extent to which human influence is contributing to this, but also having a series of toolkits to distinguish between different potential solutions offered to them. And also, despite everything that we've said, come out with a sense of some reasoned optimism as to what can be achieved because much of these problems aren't they are technically soluble if we understand what we need to do to try to avert the worst of the impacts that we may foresee. We know what needs to be done. There isn't a question mark as to what. The question mark is around how, about how to mobilize how to change behavior, mobilize political opinion, incentivize some technologies over others. So we actually know how to solve this problem. It's just solving it is really hard.
And I'm really glad that it's wanting to also bring out like, hey, there are some positive like tones surrounding this. It's not just doomer all the time,
No.
regardless of what the news cycle may lead us to believe.
Well, I mean, certainly on the whole, the weight of evidence is pretty pretty worrisome, but it's not too late. There are the time frame for avoiding the worst impacts has not yet diminished. We may the more optimistic framing around, let's say, 1.5 degrees, the window in which we will have to radically reduce our emissions is probably dwindling, but still, all hope is not lost. And personally, I find some of the extremely defeatist tone of some of the commentary, whilst I can understand and appreciate it, that isn't as helpful as we might think. I think that there is room for both pessimism and optimism within this area. And I know that might sound somewhat contradictory, but we do know what needs to be done. It's a matter of what, knowing how to do it and to enable it to be done. That's the trick.
And on the question of how, so following up with how is this curriculum structured, and what is the progression of learning like?
Sure. Well, that's a very good question. So we went around in designing this program. We um, undertook a range of different, let's say, um, pathways of progression of different subjects, trying to identify, based on NRI's unique skill sets across environmental, social, and economic areas, what is the best, or at least a credible progression, and where do we move from more generalist to more specific learning outcomes and subjects. So the program structure is roughly based on 3 years, and the first year is very much designed to share with the existing environmental science program, whereby we have relatively few new modules, one or two at the first year, but most of it is about establishing a common denominator of skills, common across environmental science, whereby the climate change and environmental scientists will be in the same modules, working together, learning from each other, and contributing to shared learning goals and activities. The second year, we see a much greater divergence and offering of modules that are much more specifically tailored to the environmental scientists. So the climate change um, cohort. So these will be modules that are only offered within the climate change program. There will be some opportunity, of course, to undertake elective modules that are shared by the other program. But the second year is where the specific climate focus comes to its own, particularly in relation to the opportunity for students to guide and manage their own learning. And we do this through a number of areas, including specifically the offering of a problem-based learning module, whereby the students themselves will effectively determine, okay, what are the areas that we're going to be looking at? What are the problems that we want to try to address? And what are the tools by which we can try to answer these questions? In particular, we will progress the development of practical skills in things like carbon accounting, risk assessment, geographic information systems. So the second year is really about developing practical skills and empowering students to define their own learning priorities and develop skills, particularly in relation to inquiry-based learning. I always think that empowering students to ask questions of themselves and other students is really valuable, because uh, very often students feel like they're at the other end of the table, where they're being forced to answer lots of questions and uh, give evidence of what they know in their own teaching, which is of course important. But I think that students can really flourish when you're giving them the opportunity. Okay, well, this is what I need to know. Tell me, this is my question. Help me get the answer. And so the final year is based on, so at this point we will have hopefully built up a range of diverse skill sets, both qualitative and quantitative. And the final year has two key priorities. The first one is to apply the skills you've learned within an independent research project, which is a very important element, whereby students can really evidence their own individuality and their own skills, and also the opportunity to engage in more defined sector and subject specific modules that are based specifically around issues of, let's say, energy and engineering or agriculture or food systems. So you have this kind of deepening and slightly more um, specific focus on different subjects in the last year.
I was already imagining, and since I graduated with my bachelor's last year, it's like, oh, if I had the chance to enroll in this program, what would it have been?
Well,
um,
we're very lucky in that we have a wide range of research active staff that have worked on so many different topics, as mentioned, including individuals who have spent decades working directly with uh, communities in climate vulnerable parts of the world. And we have so the National Resources Institute is comprised of a number of different departments, such as Department of Health and Environment, livelihoods, and a few others that are based around very different focuses, either be they social and economic or environmental. So there is a range of different opportunities for individuals to collaborate and work with research and teachers that might not necessarily be teaching on that particular program, but we are very keen, and we see every year, kind of, if you pardon the pun, cross pollination. Students that are working in one program end up being mentored by someone that might not necessarily teach in that program, but is involved in a different program, but has a series of skills and backgrounds that a particular student is really interested in. So, I in one of the other master's programs I'm involved in, one of our students is looking at migratory patterns of insects and how that might be affected by climate change with um, experts that are not necessarily teaching very heavily in the program, but nonetheless have lots of experience on studying these sorts of trends. So there's a huge, so even though there's, strict, let's say, boundaries between, what modules sit in what programs, and when it comes to the independent research program, the boundaries are much more diffuse, and we find that that works really well.
Yeah, and on the topic of being research active, I actually have a question. Caroline trying that, asking active, often use research.
Sure. One of the things that we find really helpful is that if we're talking about a particular topic that might be a little bit, ooh, pardon the pun, academic, but if we can use examples of our own work. So I recently did work in Ethiopia looking at cotton production systems, and cotton, you might not know, is a very thirsty crop, requires a lot of water. So there's a big struggle as you move into areas that require more irrigation, and a bit of a kind of a tension, or at least a resource tension between farmers that are growing and irrigating lots of cotton and other farmers that might need irrigated water for other sources. So using an example of our research and what this actually means in terms of applying a scientific method is really useful, because you can show a picture, of the area you're looking at. You can explain with a little bit of more actual experience what is really happening on the ground, and then you can show the results of your study to students and helping them make this kind of connection between something that, a table or figure or set of results is great and useful, but often it really helps students understand that this is actually happening on the ground. This is not just a metaphorical or notional idea. And by showing how your these real life challenges have manifested in your research is really useful. And hey, who doesn't want to see a nice picture or two?
True. It's always nice seeing, looking at photography and being able to play. Ah, yes, I have been here, and I did this work. I had this impact. It's kind of like the statement, where it's like if you're learning a new skill or if you're involved in a project, take progression photos because then you can look back and see how far along you've come. So as we are getting here towards the end of the episode, I want to get into just some kind of like technical questions. One of
Sure.
them being, what are you looking for an applicant since this is an undergraduate program? And then where can students go to find more information about admissions, tuition?
Sure. Uh, okay, well, that's a great question. And realistically, I mean, what we're interested in is finding students that are, on the one hand, aware that there is a serious global challenge, that feel like that they could potentially contribute to in some way to trying to address this problem. And maybe that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a clear idea of what they are exactly going to do as part of that solution, but nonetheless they feel motivated to try to engage the problem as themselves in terms of their unique skill sets, because everyone will have their own very unique set of skills and experiences. I would hope that students are not are understanding of the value of an interdisciplinary program, so that they're, you might have a student, okay, is maybe not necessarily hugely um, fascinated by um, economics, but can see the value of having some economic elements along with the science elements that they are primarily interested in. I would hope for students that have a kind of basic, let's say, scientific and economic, level, that are just engaged generally, that read the newspapers, that are primarily interested in, politics and economics, and how they are communicated. In particular, I would be interested in having students that have kept informed on the reporting, not just what is reported, but how climate change is reported in the media, to have a better understanding of, well, okay, you know, what does the science say and how is it reported, and what does good science reporting look like, and what does less good science reporting look like, and why is it important to know the difference? So I would be really interested in talking to students who have been interested, informed, involved in reading, different reports, either in terms of the mainstream media or maybe scientific magazines like Scientific American, or the name but an example, uh, and talk to them and say, okay, well, what have you taken from what you've read in terms of the scale of the problem, in terms of its um, potential solutions, and what are the main drivers for it?
And for those who might be wanting to find national students or even local, what where can they find?
The University of Greenwich website, first and foremost, I would definitely recommend looking on the Natural Resources Institute's Twitter and webpage. We have a wealth of information. They can find me, and if you have any questions, you can drop me an email. Um, and my website is on my personal work website is on the Natural Resources Institute um, website. So a quick Google should get you there. So any queries can be addressed either to me or the admissions team within the University of Greenwich.
Awesome. And for those who are watching Attico, on the episode wall, once this is made available as a VOD, I'll post all the resources there so they're easily clickable and findable, and you can go and spam Dr. Walsh's.
Oh boy.
Be prepared. And before we go and run the end credits here, I have a final question for Caroline asking, are there a wide range of career paths from a climate change?
Sure. I mean, unlike that's an excellent question. Unlike some um, other potential courses that have a relatively well established set defined careers. Okay, if you're going to do civil engineering, you're going to come out in as engineer, and they're and that is absolutely phenomenal. A climate change program, because it's quite niche, is developing, but also because it impacts such a range of different areas. I would feel very pressurized to come out and just define, okay, you're going to do this, 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 and this. I would say that this kind of program is designed to enable people to come out with a range of different skills, be they qualitative, numerative, if you really like spreadsheets, or qualitative in terms of looking at content analysis, doing interviews, looking at trying to undertake perhaps more socially relevant work. Uh, so the range of potential course. So many organizations, be they private, be they big, small, multinationals to small companies, to public organizations, local authorities, national government departments and authorities, so many of these organizations have made commitments to try to monitor their impact, understand their impact. Everything from Tesco to the local authority in the area I'm currently living will have some form of climate or carbon plan. So there isn't necessarily a very constrained suite of careers that I would um, define, but I would say that for particularly for organizations that are going to try to have made commitments to measure their impact, reduce it, or have to respond to climate pressures as they will emerge in terms of, let's say, temperature changes or precipitation, as well as groups that seek to inform and communicate the scale of the climate problem, and groups like NGOs that have a commitment to try to um, playing advocates for a particular position, and particularly on behalf of marginalized or um, vulnerable groups. Those three broad categories are kind of the ones that I would point to, but they cover such a wide range of different organizations. It's very difficult to try to pinpoint a range. I would say if you're interested in policy, if you're interested in kind of technical solutions or technical monitoring, if you're interested in advocacy, if you're interested in communication of climate change, this program is perfect for you.
Thank
And one last thing, again, this is some, but generally we work very hard to um, ensure that student experience is, well, most of our students have no problem in emailing us, day or night, because we are very responsive, and we generally work really hard because pretty nice people. Okay, I won't say that too loud because some people's ears will be burning. But the folks that we work with have, are very committed to ensuring that students get something that is not just worthwhile but is enjoyable whilst you're doing it. And we try very hard to create a collegiate atmosphere through things like study groups, we have field trips, we do seminars, and this makes, I think, uh, for particularly something like this that kind of skirts a little bit on the advocacy side, or might be relevant to students that have a, a view that this is something that is more important than just a career to get a job to get money at the end of the day. I think this honest exchange of ideas, which we are very very keen to maintain with our students, is really valuable because this is more important than just getting another job. Hopefully, you can the idea being you can get a job and do something meaningful at the end of the day.
Love that. And I can't wait to see how, I mean, my optimistic hope is that we'll be seeing more positions, yes, good and passionate about doing and be live off doing, as opposed to just being another cog in the wheel that's only perpetuating the problem. Thank you so much, Dr. Walsh, for joining me to talk about this brand new program offered at the University of Greenwich. And I look forward to having you on next week to talk about the master's program. Yes.
And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been an absolute joy.
Yeah, and it's been a pleasure. And I'm going to run the end credits, so hang tight. We'll be right back.